Russia. The events over the weekend are an internal Russian matter, and one more demonstration of the big strategic mistake that President Putin has made with his illegal war against Ukraine. NATO is also monitoring the situation in Belarus. Allies condemn Russia's announcements about the deployment of nuclear weapons to Belarus. This is reckless and irresponsible. We don't see any indication that Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons, but NATO remains vigilant. We call on Belarus to stop its support for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. Moscow is attempting to intimidate us and deter us from supporting Ukraine. But we will not be intimidated. We will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And we will defend all allies against any threat. So, Mr. President, Minister, it's great to be together with you here today, and I look forward to continue to work with you and to welcome you to the Vilnius summit.
Thank you. I invite the Minister of Defense of Germany, Boris Pistorius, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, President, dear Jens. Ladies and gentlemen, this exercise really was very, very impressive, and the members of the North Atlantic Council quite agree, I think, and I would like to thank them for their visit here. I really appreciate that. The men and women of Armored Infantry Brigade 41 of the Lithuanian Algiras battalion gave a spectacular performance. And the cooperation with our Lithuanian friends works very well, has been working very well during the last almost 7 years. And I thank all my troops for the outstanding hospitality of Lithuania. Thank you very much. Armored Infantry Brigade 41 has shown us that they have got what it takes. This is very important too. 1,000 troops, 350 vehicles, at a very short notice, just 24 hours, something like that. This was prepared by the forward command element. In Lithuania, they make a powerful contribution to defend NATO eastern flank. Stand side by side with their allies, ready to defend Lithuania together when it is necessary. Now we are looking towards the NATO summit, which also will be protecting at short notice with our additional capabilities, which means we will protect the summit with our air defense capabilities. And I expect we will achieve good results that will continue to challenge us. Let me add something which I already mentioned earlier this day. Germany used to be the eastern flank of NATO territory until the end of Warsaw Pact. And we could always rely and always trust in our allies in NATO, who were always willing and able to protect our security and our freedom in Germany as a very exposed country at the eastern flank of NATO at that time. And nowadays, eastern flank is, for example, the Baltics, Poland, Slovakia and other countries. And Slovakia and Poland and the Baltics are very much exposed in a special way, of course, because of the geographic situation. And Germany, as the biggest economy in Europe and an important member of NATO, of course, is willing and will be able to take responsibility now for the new eastern flank after more than 3 decades. We are willing to contribute our part to protect it. And that means precisely Germany is ready to deploy a robust brigade in Lithuania on a permanent basis, provided that adequate infrastructure, for example, barracks, exercise infrastructure, ammunition depots are given, and that SACEUR, of course, maintains the flexibility needed according NATO planning. This is very crucial too. So therefore, I'm very glad to be here again, and it's certainly not my last time in Lithuania. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I invite the media representatives to pose their questions. Please take a microphone, introduce yourself, and indicate who you are addressing your question to.
Thank you, Christina. My name is Saulius Jakučionis. I'm from news agency Baltic News Service. I have a question for the German Minister of Defense, Mr. Pistorius. Minister, when Germany will make a decision regarding sending air defense capabilities to Lithuania under this new air defense model, which was agreed in NATO several weeks ago, and also on the other matter, touching upon the press conference previously, which where you took place in Vilnius airport, can you indeed confirm that there are Wagner units being stationed to Belarus? Thank you very much. And also, can you confirm that Wagner units are being stationed in Belarus? Thank you. And President Nausėda, I also have a question for you. What are the other countries except Germany? Lithuania is negotiating to send to deploy air defense capabilities. Thank you.
From my part, I don't have any newer information about the deployment of Wagner troops or units into Belarus.
Okay. What about air defense? Air defense, when you will make the decision to send units to Lithuania?
Air defense, well, we made our decision for the summit this year, but not more at the moment.
This is the issue I would like to touch too, because air defense systems are critically important, especially in the crisis scenario. Of course, the air policing missions are important during the peacetime, but air defense systems are much more important if the situation starts to deteriorate. And the war in Ukraine showed that really to control the airspaces is one of the most important possibilities to reduce the losses, especially during initial stage of the crisis. But regarding your question, yes, Minister already mentioned that now we are talking about air defense systems provided during the NATO summit and shortly afterwards. We are talking about air defense systems on a rotational basis after the Vilnius summit. And I already started my discussions with different allies, namely Netherlands, France, Germany, and other countries, but so far it's very complicated issue to answer this question and who will be responsible for which part or which element of air defense systems. Much more important is that we already have the conclusion or decision on the NATO level that air defense systems in the eastern flank on rotational basis, this is probably adequate response to the current situation, and we are looking forward to cooperate with our partners in the nearest future regarding this issue.
Thank you. We have a second media question, please.
Natalia Drozdiak from Bloomberg. Thank you so much for the questions. For Secretary Stoltenberg, what impact does NATO expect the Wagner events to have on the battlefield in Ukraine? And German Minister Pistorius, I was curious to ask, why did Germany change its decision about having permanent troops based in Lithuania? Was this at all tied to the Wagner events over the weekend, or was this in motion already before? Thank you.
I think what we've seen in Russia over the last days demonstrates the fragility of the German regime. And of course it is a demonstration of weakness.
The German regime?
When there are... Sorry?
Not the German regime.
No, sorry, the Russian. sorry.
I'm sorry. They're quite stable at the moment.
Sorry. We see the weakness of the Russian regime, and it also demonstrates how difficult and dangerous it is for President Putin to be reliant on mercenaries. That has actually turned against him. And it also demonstrates that it is hard to predict exactly what will now happen in the next days and weeks, but we should not make the mistakes that we are underestimating the Russians. So we need to continue to provide support to Ukraine, and that's exactly what NATO and NATO allies are doing. with military support, but also support for the long term. And that's in a way what we can say today about the effects on the battlefield in Ukraine.
To your question, it is not really a change of our position. What I wanted and what I did emphasize today was to say we are willing to do that under two preconditions. And the one is, of course, the infrastructure which the Lithuanian government is willing and prepared to provide as soon as possible. And we agreed to build up the brigade in the same speed like improving, like building up the infrastructure succeeds in Lithuania. And the second point is very important too, regarding and looking to Jens Stoltenberg. Of course, SACEUR has certain interests and very important interests too. So we said he has to have the possibility to maintain military flexibility at the eastern flank, which is very important too. So if he doesn't disagree, we will go on and proceed in that way.
From my side, I can only assure you that our part of the job we will do as good as possible and as quick as possible, meaning elements of infrastructure in order to accommodate the brigade size presence of German troops in my country.
Thank you. We have time for one last question, please.
Thank you very much. Michael Fischer, German Press Agency. I have a question for the Secretary General, first of all. Does NATO need to react in any way on the recent developments in Russia? President Nauseda, for example, suggested yesterday to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO right now if the Wagner troops will settle in Belarus. Is that an option from your point of view, or are there any consequences for the NATO-Russia Founding Act? And my second question to you would be, what message goes out from the permanent deployment of the German brigade that was announced by Minister Pistorius today? What message goes out to Mr. Putin and Mr. Lukashenko from that deployment? And Mr. Nauseda, a question on the brigade too. The condition is that Lithuania builds the infrastructure for the brigade. By when will that be finished?
Let me start by saying that we, of course, very much welcome the German leadership, which has been demonstrated throughout actually a long time, but it's very much enhanced by the German announcement today, because a German-led battle group, but also more German troops deployed here, shows a strong German commitment to our collective defense, to our shared security, and it's part of the adaptation of NATO which has taken place since 2014 with high readiness of forces, but also with more deployments of combat-ready NATO troops in the eastern part of the alliance, including the battle groups, and one of them is the German-led battle group here in Lithuania. So this demonstrates German leadership, German commitment to our transatlantic bond, and it also demonstrates the value of a multilateral NATO commitment to a country like Lithuania. It sends, of course, a message, our presence here, and also the exercise we just watched, of NATO readiness and NATO capability to defend every inch of NATO territory. And the reason we do that is, of course, not to provoke a conflict, but it is to prevent a conflict, because credible deterrence is about preventing war, it's about preventing conflict, it's about preventing an attack and preserving peace. And this is not only about forward presence, which is important, but it's also about pre-positioned equipment supplies, high readiness and exercises. So it's all of this together, backed also by significant air and naval power. And that also fits into the issue of air defense. I think, of course, land-based air defense systems are important, but we have to understand that when we now have this rotational model in place for air defense, which can make it easier for us to switch from air policing to air defense, air forces is also part of air defense, and naval forces can also provide significant air defense capabilities on very short notice. So this is the German announcement is welcomed, and it's part of a pattern, a big adaptation of NATO that have taken place over several years. One more thing about this is that we will also make important decisions at the Vilnius summit on the new force structure, the new force model, and also with plans that will dedicate specific forces to protect specific territories. This is the first time since actually the Cold War where we are going to have plans linked to specific forces to protect specific territories. Then the first question was on... Yeah, well, so first of all, I think it's a bit early to say exactly because things may still evolve. Second, we are of course monitoring very closely, and we are able to react quickly if there is a need. At the same time, I think it is important to remind you all that this is about internal Russian matters, and therefore what NATO is focused on is to support Ukraine. It demonstrates the fragility of the Russian regime, but it's not for NATO to intervene in those issues. That's a Russian matter. What matters for NATO is to not be intimidated, not be prevented from continue to provide unprecedented support for Ukraine, and also, of course, to have the necessary deterrence and defense. We have that already. We have increased our presence over the years, and with the German announcement, we have yet another example of how allies are increasing their presence. But again, it's not only about presence, it's also about the ability to have early warnings, indications, and then react quickly if there is a need, and this exercise demonstrates exactly that.
My part of the question, we are simplify the procedures and technical procedures, legal procedures in order to be able to finalize the building of infrastructure by 2026, but I will be not angry if the Minister of Defense, which is sitting in front of me, will finalize in 2025. Anyway, we have a strong political commitment in Lithuania to find out the necessary financial resources in order to be able to finance the needs of infrastructure, but of course, hand in hand, modernization of our armed forces, it's very important priority to us too.
Thank you. The press conference is over. I wish everyone a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.
You have been watching NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Lithuanian President Nausėda, and German Defense Minister Pistorius speaking in Pravda, Lithuania. In the past few hours, Germany has announced that it is ready to station around 4,000 additional troops in Lithuania on a permanent basis to strengthen NATO's eastern border. That's on top of the 1,000 German troops already ground there. The offer coming after Lithuania's president called for a stronger NATO presence in his country. The military alliance's next summit is set to be held in the Lithuanian capital in 2 weeks' time. DW Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra von Namen is in Lithuania. She has been following this press conference and these developments. So walk us through the key agreement, Alexandra, and what your impressions were after hearing these leaders speaking.
Well, my first impression was, I have to say, that despite saying, and all of them stressed that NATO and allies are monitoring what's happening in Russia and in Belarus, I think it's fair to say that they are concerned about the situation there. And that is why Lithuania is calling on NATO to further boost its presence here and also to beef up not only the number of its troops, but also the air defense capabilities. The major takeaway is the decision that was announced today is the decision by the German Defense Minister to permanently deploy 4,000 German soldiers to Lithuania, and that is, of course, a very important decision for this small country. Its army consists of 20,000 soldiers, and now getting additional 4,000 soldiers being deployed here on a permanent basis. It is a big deal, however, and this is also what Minister Pistorius stressed during his press conference. This is based on the precondition that the infrastructure that the German brigade would need has to be built, and it is expected to be in place in 2026.
We also heard the German defense minister asked whether or not this was a change in position, and rather he was asked why the change in position. Just tell us a little bit about how big a deal this particular permanent deployment is for Germany if we look at the overall policy that the country has had.
Well, the decision today was certainly a surprise, because in the last months and weeks, the German position was, well, we're ready to provide equipment and soldiers, but on a rotation basis. We don't want to base a brigade in Lithuania permanently. So the fact, this change of mind, this decision today is a surprise and very telling. I could imagine that the pressure was growing on a German government to change its stance and to make this promise. However, German Defense Minister Pistorius dodged the question what was the motivation to announce this decision today, just saying that, of course, it's clear, as he put it, that Germany, as an important ally, as the biggest economy in Europe, wants to contribute and is determined to strengthen the defenses on NATO's eastern flank. So we didn't get the answer whether the recent events in Russia were the reason for Germany to now announce that they are going to permanently deploy a robust brigade to Lithuania.
And we know that German soldiers, they're already there in Lithuania and participating in joint exercises with their Lithuanian counterparts on a regular basis. You had a chance to observe one of those exercises. Let's have a look, and then we'll get perspective from you thereafter.
Training to fight side by side. If Russia attacks, these German soldiers and their Lithuanian comrades will have to work together to repel the assault. That's why they're practicing here on the Pabrada training ground, facing a number of challenges.
You have different standards regarding tactics that you have to bring together and harmonize, basically, that when I give my orders, everyone knows what I'm talking about and what I want. And that is something we have to keep working on.
This is a great opportunity for us to train together with German forces, our comrades. And of course, this is the main goal for this exercise, is to show our readiness and ensure it that we are capable to act against any threat.
The exercise started with the temporary deployment of soldiers and heavy equipment from Germany's 41st Mechanized Infantry Brigade. They are the reinforcements NATO promised Lithuania after the beginning of Russia's war on Ukraine.
This training ground is just about 20 kilometers from the border with Belarus, a key Russian ally that served as a launchpad for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Only days ago, the Kremlin said it had started to position tactical nuclear weapons there. In this context, the recent developments in Russia have certainly affirmed Lithuania's sense of being extremely vulnerable in the face of an unstable and aggressive neighbor.
The permanent deployment of the German brigade has been a constant source of friction between the two countries. But soldiers and commanders here in Pabrada say they are not interested in talking politics.
As the commander of Mechanized Infantry Brigade 4-1, I concentrate on my own brigade tasks, and I would comment on those. But I also have to make it very clear that since 2017, we have deployed battle groups along NATO's eastern flank. We have enhanced our interoperability. And I think we have already at that time shown our dedication.
And talking to officers such as platoon leader Captain Moritz, you realize they know the stakes are high here.
There's no difference in defending Lithuania from defending Germany when it comes to me or my men. This is NATO territory, and we're always ready to come back if needed so.
This training exercise is one of many drills taking place in Europe. But it's a crucial one to help NATO forces improve their ability to respond to any contingency at very short notice.
So now we have this announcement, Alexandra, as we've heard, Germany saying it's ready to station around 4,000 additional troops in Lithuania on a permanent basis. When we heard that press conference earlier from the head of NATO, from the Lithuanian president, from the German defense minister, they were asked, what message does this now send to Putin and Lukashenko? What did you make of that answer?
Well, it was not a new answer, I have to say. That is what we heard before from NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, for instance. But of course, it is a message that is important from the view of the alliance. And the message is, as Stoltenberg put it, that this is a clear signal that the alliance is determined to defend every inch of its territory. He once again stressed it's not meant to provoke Russia or to send any different signals to the Kremlin. It's just to make sure, don't make any mistake. We are here. We are ready to defend our territory.
The situation in Russia right now, this failed mutiny that we saw over the weekend, Alexandra, how is that impacting preparations for the upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius? How are Ukraine's partners looking on at this? What are they positioning for now?
Well, I think that we can assume that there will be more discussions, and there are probably discussions underway among the Supreme Allied Commander of the Alliance and the military chiefs, how to make sure that this summit in Vilnius that is so important for the whole alliance will be going on smoothly and that nothing will happen. We know that there will be a no-fly zone here over Vilnius for 2 days for the duration of the summit. We know that Germany will deploy additional air defense systems to protect this area. But I think that in the face of acknowledging that we are now probably dealing with a more unstable regime in Moscow, and who knows, maybe, even though it's not confirmed, with Prigozhin and his Wagner troops in Belarus, the NATO allies will be discussing whether further measures should be introduced to make sure that all the NATO leaders who are going to meet here will be safe and can conduct this summit without anything happening.
Alexandra von Namen in Lithuania, thank you so much. And as heads from NATO, Lithuania and Germany have been addressing the recent short-lived revolt by Russia's Wagner group mercenaries, Western analysts say that the failed mutiny has further exposed the weaknesses of Russian President Vladimir Putin. But many questions remain about how the dramatic event